Isn't that just terrific? Okay, well, I'm going to bring them all out. Come on, come behind me. Don't leave me here. Let's bring them all out. Fantastic. Very Jacobsian, the group of you. And just a tremendous illustration, I think, of the diversity of her views and how they resonate. So I will start from the back end and go back forward. The language piece, just fabulous, Dan. You know, because of what it talks about diversity. Somebody in the crowd had said, what's a Jacobsian concept? And we were talking about diversity being one of them. And this notion that languages are part of the way the species differentiates itself. And I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Wade Davis, who is interesting. You should at some point approach him because he was an interesting follower of Jane's ideas and others. And that idea of how do we maintain all the oldness of our culture, whether it's old work or old buildings or old languages, because they come back. You know, we continue to inform and learn, which I'm assuming is part of what's motivated you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we tend to think that, and many communities tend to think that switching to English and abandoning your language and culture is the way to move forward in America. But actually, if you look at the model immigrant communities, those are actually the ones that have maintained their languages. The ones that have been most successful actually have maintained their cultures. They have their own school systems and so forth. So abandoning one's language and culture has nothing to do with advancing oneself or one's community in America, and that's one of our messages, certainly.
I mean, one of the things that we think about in terms of our work at MAS is that the physical city allows opportunities for this kind of mingling, right? So you can still maintain your language and your culture, but that we have ways in which we can enable interactions and serendipity and all the different ways that the social capital can be generated. And a number of you may not have called it social capital. And in fact, I don't think Jane actually calls it social capital, although we look back and recognize that she's the first person to talk about that. Do the rest of you want to comment a little bit about this, about what got you thinking this way and how it relates to the diversity piece?
Well, I would say for our part, I mean, I think the MoFed City app that I discussed is probably the most relevant for this audience and this conversation. We're really interested in sort of playing with this idea of what is authentic or not,
right.
in that there really isn't such a thing, especially in New York, where cultures are coming from everywhere and then they end up here and you have new cuisines that are created essentially, and that's sort of what we want to get across through that app is there's no such thing perhaps as authentic Chinese cuisine. In Manhattan's Chinatown, you have something that's entirely new, and it's exciting for that reason. And there are stories there that explain why that food is the way it is.
But like language, I mean, language manifests in a certain kind of way, out of a certain place, and then it morphs and changes, and so does food. So now you may have initially gotten a certain kind of Chinese food in Chinatown, but now you'll get Chinese food all over the place in different kinds of versions and twists, and it's another manifestation of diversity and differentiation. These are really interesting Jacobs concepts. They're really biology concepts, you know, the way a species differentiates itself. So we see it in language, we see it in food, and we see it in smell.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, you've got, and I love the sort of nostalgic aspects of what you were talking about in your own childhood, and I love that picture of the Twinkies. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Well, it actually did smell like Twinkies on Prince Street in the early 70s. And I've just found that smell is such a compelling way to start memories, just to begin flowing the juices of memory.
Yeah.
When I started talking about smell with old timers from Soho, it just turned into this, a huge discussion on every kind of thing that people remembered about growing up in Soho. And it was just so powerful to start with that seed, and it really opens up people's memories of just about everything. And it was incredible. And I got a lot of my other memories from starting with smell. And then we went on to other things, like, things that we used to do, places we used to go. And everybody had a smell associated with it. So it is incredible how powerful smell is to people, especially from when they were children. because, people smell things for the first time when they're children.
Well, and it's sort of, I mean, as you say, there's all sorts of different kinds of smell.
Yeah.
And in some languages, there are many, many more words to illustrate. Although English is a bit lacking, I think, always. We don't always have as many words to describe exactly what something smells like, but sometimes other languages do.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about what all of you are talking about is you're describing aspects of the city that those controllers that I was lamenting earlier sometimes want to get rid of. They think, oh, well, smells in a city are a bad thing.
Well, no. I mean,
Right.
they identify places, I think.
Right.
They really do.
Right.
And there are a lot of smells in New York City that you don't really have anymore, so.
Yeah. Well, or that you just don't know where they are, maybe.
Well,
maybe not where they once were.
printing, and which was a big industry in
Right.
Soho, and wet cardboard, because cardboard was also a big industry in
I was just
Soho.
about to say methane from animal waste, but we still do have that in parts. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I haven't got to you two yet. I mean, the idea of storytelling and visualization, you sort of mesh those two ideas together. It's sort of interesting. Do you want to add something to this mix?
Yeah, I think the interesting part is that this changes over time, right? We can easily navigate space and go from one neighborhood to the other and see the diversity and the changes, but then the time factor is not really necessarily immediately clear. It's visible sometimes, but it's difficult to explore something in the past, right? And it's really interesting how neighborhoods changed. I love going by 5 Points, where 5 Points used to be, right? It's the civic district now. They're all the government's buildings. There's also the tombs, as they're called, the jail, which has been there forever, for, 150 years, but everything else around it changed, right? It used to be a slum, now it's where all government gets conducted. It's so fascinating to see
different
that
kind
kind
of
of
slum.
change. Yeah, well,
Sorry.
Quite all right.
It's good. Do you want to run something? Do you want to add something too?
Sorry?
Do you want to add anything to this sort of musings we're doing here?
Well, I mean, the one idea I would like to speak about is the idea of being really public and shared. So
Yeah.
this, the streets are the component of the city that we use the most, and at the same time, it's not the most public and equal space we have.
Streets.
Yes. So we have 12,750 miles of streets in New York. That's a lot of space that
That's
could
actually
be,
public.
Uh,
You and I own
yes
it.
and no. Yes. Yeah. We use it,
Right.
and one of our thoughts and motives were, okay, it's not fully accessible and therefore public. What can we do about this? And having a colleague and a friend that was familiar with this situation very well, it's something that was close to our heart as well. So that was a driver behind the project.
Around just changing the visualization of it. Well, somebody in the audience will know this. It's some significant statistic of what percentage of the public space that is owned by New York, that we as citizens of New York own, what percentage of streets. Does anybody know what it is? It's high. Is there a DOT person here who number crunches that? Kate, where are you? Kate Slevin, she knows. Where is she?
1/3 of city streets. 1/3 of the city streets.
1/3 of the city. 33% of the city is actually streets. Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And actually, New York's been one of the New York City government has actually been quite brave about that in trying to repurpose those streets. But you're adding a whole new element of it to it. Yeah.
The idea is really, to use the streets as a platform through which we can communicate
Yeah.
to all of us.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is another Jacobsian thing about connection, connective
Correct.
tissue. That, and you think of her early writings when she was writing for Iron Age magazine. Look this up when you go home. She wrote an article for Iron Age before she wrote Death and Life about the sewer systems and at the manhole covers, actually. So you guys would be interested in this. And started to identify that there was actually a system, that it was sort of her early way of looking at a piece of infrastructure, actually man-made infrastructure in the city that actually mimicked nature. and was actually a connected system. And now you think about it, we have the sharing economy. We have a whole bunch of ways that you all, young folk, take for granted this kind of horizontal connection. But Jacobs was identifying this stuff early and saying these are the secrets of neighborhoods, short blocks and turning and all this kind of connective tissue, and you're all telling those stories. I want to just ask you a general question, and then we'll come out to you guys. I'm sure you've got something to pose. Neighborhood change.
Yes.
So what do we think about this? Because you're all interestingly documenting, and you just said, you know, change is part of city life, but you're documenting in different kinds of ways what is actually happening in a neighborhood or a part of the city. What do we think about change? Because it's a bit of a heated topic. We had lots of provocation earlier today. If you were here, you heard folks saying, well, I don't like the way it's changing, or, well, I'm against change. Well, no, I'm not against change. Well, do we just want things to stay the same, or?
No.
Oh, no, okay. Talk to
Well,
me about change.
It's in the nature of cities to change, and if New York City stayed the same, it would atrophy and die.
Right.
But there are ways to change the city responsibly and with a little bit of forethought and planning, and not based just on the dollar. You know, and and SoHo has changed a lot.
Yeah.
In
I
many,
don't know where you have to go for Twinkies now.
yeah, I don't think you can buy Twinkies in SoHo anymore. But
Who's got Twinkies in their neighborhood?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
yeah.
Designer Twinkies. Yeah.
So, you know, but it's changed. The neighborhood has changed for the better and for the worse.
I mean, it's a truism that, you know, something that always changes is change. We can be sure of change happening no matter what.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm wrestling with, what we wrestle with, I think, and we wrestle with it at MAS, and I'm sure other organizations around the world are having the same question, how much of a city is so essential to its functioning that you want to actually not have that aspect change.
Yeah.
And maybe there are certain things we should be introducing that encourage a certain kind of change. What do you guys think?
Well, you know, a change is part of our evolution.
Right.
It will happen. And the question really is how, and how will we shape that change, and what will be the parameters by which it will be, you know, the city will be shaped and changed. So if we as community can have some control over that or some effect, then
The thing, I
things
mean,
are
let's,
different.
you know, if you think of European cities or older cities, or think of our neighborhoods, some of our older neighborhoods, I'm going to try to mesh Emma and Daniel's concepts of food and language. You know, there may have been a place that I remember a couple of years ago when I was new to New York, and someone said, go to Arthur Avenue. So I went to Arthur Avenue on Christmas Eve, and I stood there in line for anybody who's done this knows what I'm talking about. We waited for 3.5 hours for fresh mozzarella at Casa de Mozzarella. And it was freezing, and I forced my sister, come on, we're going to do this. And as we were chatting, we were surrounded by people who used to live in Arthur Avenue, who now lived God knows where, and were coming back expressly for that mozzarella. And, you know, so there's a sad thing when that mozzarella is no longer there. So I guess using the diversity question, would we say, well, it's okay as long as that mozzarella is available somewhere. It doesn't always have to be in my favorite place in Arthur Avenue. Do you know what I'm getting at? Because if it moves from being old Italian to then being a roti shop, that might be just fine, right? But that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that diversity of use is what's really important in some ways. I think
But
a
you
lot
don't,
of
you don't
times
minimize to just one thing.
Right. I mean, a lot of times in conversations about preservation, there's a heavy emphasis on aesthetics, and
Right.
I think one thing that we want to try to communicate with the SoHo City app is that, as I mentioned earlier, food is always changing. There's no kind of concrete, or monolithic cuisine in any part of the world, but especially in America and especially in New York. And sort of acknowledging that and celebrating it is really important. At the same time, one sort of goal of the app is to hopefully highlight and promote these businesses so that they stick around a little longer. I think we acknowledge that at some point, a tour that we create might become obsolete because the neighborhood will change so much that some of those businesses aren't there anymore. But then the app also becomes a historical marker to
Right.
note that that place was there. And then it can also evolve to incorporate new businesses as they appear. And
I mean, there is something about the layers of the city, you know, that it's not 2D, it's 3D or whatever the next dimension
Exactly.
is. And that the idea is that you can see, well, it was an Italian, then it became a Chinese, and now it's a this, and now it's a that. And, you know, that notion, it was in one of the films about new ideas need old buildings. I mean, a lot of our advocacy is always about maintaining a diversity of building in a neighborhood because you need cheap buildings, first of all, for new businesses to start. But also, there's something about embodying an old building that's pretty fabulous, right? So, but I hear you on this. It's just we have to, I think there was a comment earlier this afternoon about that we need the preservation movement to not just think about buildings. We need to think about social and economic assets in neighborhoods and how do those get preserved. And certainly we in our work in neighborhoods hear from folks that have a particular area or a place that they would like to see preserved. And, you know, our architectural historic experts would not be too interested in the building that they want to keep. Hello. But they want to. The neighborhood wants to. So. But do you want to tie in the language piece again? I mean, you must be picking all this up as you look at the language.
Yeah, well, it would be one thing if, as you said, things were just moving, but in many cases, they're not just moving, they're really dispersing and dying. So if you look at Italian dialects, for instance, that
Right.
used to be spoken all over, you know, Arthur Avenue and other places, where did they go? They went to the suburbs and died, basically. Probably because of...
There are no Italian suburbs?
Well, no.
Surely not.
Yes, there are, but cultural transmission is a bit different in the suburbs than it is on the city streets.
Right.
There's
So you don't care if they went to Philly. They're okay if they're in another city.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe they survived in Philly. But there used to be actual urban neighborhoods where Italian dialects were kept alive, where Danish dialects were kept alive in Sunset Park.
Right.
All of those things dispersed into the kind of, suburbia.
Yeah, I mean, the concrete version of that for me is the garment district. You know, we've been longtime advocates of the garment district, and we think the city needs to get really imaginative about how to maintain the integrity of the garment district for that very reason. There might be a sense, oh, well, you can let those button makers go off to Queens, or they can go off to, but actually there's something about that mix of ecosystem in the garment district that maybe it has to morph, maybe the land use has to change somewhat, maybe it goes upstairs, I don't know what, but there is this ecosystem piece that you don't really want to completely wreck, right? You want to, I mean, so I think this is what will keep MAS in business for a while, thanks very much, is how to maintain this balance between being open to ideas and change and at the same time recognizing that you want to build on an existing fabric or ingredient list, right, or dialect makeup. Yeah, fascinating. What's wonderful about the way you've all done this, I think, and what I think is really a great Jacobsian principle, is that you can spend some time looking at a particular domain, whether it's languages and diversity of languages, or food culture, or physical environment, or certain ways in which people have memories and associated with their history. And you can learn something about the pattern of how change occurs in that domain. And what are the important things that help that domain maintain its integrity? This is why resilience, I like the term, because it's about the integrity of a domain. And I think we can learn so much about cities by just looking at the particulars within it, eh? And you guys are illustrating that beautifully. And I love I've just got to say, hats off to the urbanists for coming up with this concept. Very Jacobsian to have us think about our eyes and our ears and our hands and how we psychically experience the city, and wonderful. Okay, let's put the house lights up. We got a few minutes. Give us your best shot, yes, and we're going to look for, hi Jack, we're going to look for questions rather than long treatise comments, if you know what I mean. Mr. Eichenbaum, you're first.
I'm concerned about cell phone zombies.
Okay.
So I want to ask you what you think about cell phone zombies and what you think
Lawrence has got a mic there.
Jacobs would think about cell phones.
All right, so I'll paraphrase for Jack, and then Lawrence has a mic, so the next person to put your hand up for the question, and I got it, Jack, I'll tell it for you, and Lawrence will go to the next question. Okay, so Jack is saying, cogently, what about cell phone zombies on the streets? What do we think of that, right?
And Jane, too.
And what would Jane think, yeah. Well, we never really knew what Jane would think, but go for it. What do you guys think of cell phone zombies?
Well, it definitely minimizes serendipitous
Yeah.
interaction and just chance meetings, that's for sure. And it also makes the streets very dangerous.
Yeah. And in fact, it minimizes your senses. It actually turns
Sure.
off those senses because all you're doing. Yeah. What do you guys think?
I would agree.
Wait, first of all, any of you want to own up? Anybody a cell phone zombie?
I mean, we're all guilty
I've
of it to
texted all
some
of
extent.
Probably
Go.
the
I agree it's a bad thing, obviously, but when you're walking around trying to learn about something, you might have a book in your hand. And how is that any different from reading a page in a book while having your phone up? Because-
Erudite cell phone zombies.
Well, exactly.
They do exist.
You could
So-
be reading a book on your cell phone.
Exactly. I appreciate what Sasha's saying. You could be reading, they could be reading a book.
I
Jack.
think the idea, too, is to use it as, I mean, sure, there are people who are just staring at their phone all the time, but they're actually missing what's in front of them. And I think the point is to actually experience what is there in
I mean,
front
this,
of you.
I
So-
guess it's really a question, are we, I mean, not to draw too many generalizations, and when you're over 50, you tend to do this, but, you know, are we creating a culture that no longer pays attention to this, to the environment in which they're physically present? Daniel's nodding.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as somebody who takes the train every day, I see a whole army of people just playing Candy Crush, you know, when yeah, and totally not interacting with people. So there's, for me, you know, an element of on the language side is people striking up conversations and talking with each other and using their language with their neighbors. And now, you know, people sit next to each other and are playing Candy Crush.
I think we should charge everybody when you go home, talk to the person on the subway next to you,
Yeah.
in whatever language you choose, to keep Dan happy. Okay, do you want to?
I mean, I would say that people aren't going to stop using their phones. So in some ways, we need to figure out, and I think you're trying to do this as well, how to encourage people to look up a little bit, but maybe using the phone to prompt that looking up. Because again,
Like your app,
exactly.
which is actually get them out of that phone. They look at the phone and then they pay attention to what's around them.
Right. There's another relatively new app that some of you may have heard of called Detour, which is another sort of urban walking tour. And it's completely audio-based, so there's no visual component. But part of the point is that you're actually quite immersed while you're listening to the audio from the app, but then it will prompt you at certain times to, say, when you're in a local business, say hi to the store owner. And so
And they do it.
it's a little strange that we need to be prompted to talk to each other, and I don't like that idea. But at the same time, I'm okay with the idea that maybe phones can play that role.
But again, it may come full circle. I mean, the things change so quickly. We go from phoning to texting to who knows what's next, right? Okay, another question. Where are you, Lawrence? Where is the microphone?
There's two.
All right, and we'll find somebody who wants to talk into it. Right there. How about right there?
Gotta go.
We'll go this way first, and then I'll come to you, Jamie. Jamie, you go find somebody, and we're going to do Lawrence
Are there
first.
any hands on this?
Hi. This is a ruralist's question. What is the place in the city for a citizen?
Good question. I'm going to be interested to hear how they define citizen. What is the place of the citizen in the city? I inverted it. Did I do it right? Okay. Thoughts? Who's a citizen, first of all?
Well, that's
Sasha, go.
Yeah, who's the citizen? It's, I don't know. Let's talk about that. I mean, someone else has to define that. I don't know. Is everybody could be or nobody is? In New York is very difficult.
All right,
I feel like.
I'll help you out
Maybe it's
here.
in
I'll help you out. All right, so first of all, I think there is a move around the world in other cities to say that actually, and if you look at the root of citizen, it actually is derived from city. Go home and Google that, you'll see what I mean. So people's attachment to their sense of place is the city, in fact, and then we took that concept and created a nation state that identified them as a citizen of a nation. But in fact, there's a move in many cities now to give the vote, municipal vote, to a person that has a residential address in that city. Do not need to be a citizen of the country. You can just have a residential address and then you can vote for the local official. So that's a different understanding of citizenship. So I think we'll take that as the question. You're all talking actually about an engaged citizenry. What do you think the role is? They're not zombies in Jack's world. So.
well, then
Yuki?
the citizen is the person who has the right to decide how to shape their city.
Go, girl.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm with you.
and not some other,
Entity.
Entity, right? Exactly.
Anybody else want to comment on that? You're nodding. They're nodding.
Well, but I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, does it really mean only the public spaces? And what is a public space?
Right.
Example, the sidewalks actually owned by the property owners, not by the city, many
Right.
of them.
Right.
So And
But property owners are citizens as well.
exactly.
So,
And they're willing or forced to share the sidewalk. You know, they cannot close it and say, you can't cross.
right.
I mean, it'd be interesting if we could get citizenship to be not seen as an individual entitlement, but that there's some kind of shared citizenship, that we are shared, as I would say, stewardship, for instance, that we have a shared sense of citizenship around the city, maybe, eh?
Yeah. I mean, I was going
I'm
to
an
say
old
that
lefty, so there you go.
if, whether you grew up in New York or you came here from somewhere else, the identity of being a New Yorker is kind of just living here. It doesn't really matter where you came from. That's kind of the
Right.
whole point of the city in a way. And so maybe it is kind of a more place-based notion of citizenship rather than, as you said, individual or even neighborhood-based. It's just New York.
Yeah, I mean, we are able to get away with that when people will say, I was born in Canada, but I have dual citizenship, and people say, oh, you're living in the United States, and I say, no, actually, I'm living in New York City.
Exactly.
The particular kind of thing. Okay, let's go over here. Jamie, who'd you come up with? Yeah, hi.
This morning there was,
So much for that, Mike. There's a mic
There was
over
that
here.
mic.
Just belt it out, Scott.
sure. So this morning, there was a presentation about Sidewalk Lab, and I was admittedly a bit horrified by this co-opting of the sidewalk basically by Google. This idea that sort of ubiquitous data was the answer to the city. And I, first of all, love the fact that what you guys are presenting was, in fact, kind of the opposite. It's about sharing the experience with other human beings in the street.
Question there, Scott. Give us a question.
So obviously, Jane Jacobs loved the sidewalk, and I kept hearing that term and thinking, what would Jane Jacobs think of the sidewalk being co-opted by a private entity,
Right.
basically Google, as sort of the...
So you're responding to Dan Doctoroff, I think, the notion that sensors and the smart city is
Sure.
going to somehow turn us into this high-functioning, mechanistically controlled environment. Yeah.
Well said, yes.
Did I get it? Okay. What do you think there? Is that your New York that he's talking about?
I would hope the citizens would rebel.
Call to arms, you heard it
Yeah.
here first.
No, I definitely agree with this. Smart does not mean sensors and data collections, but by no means. And I think that's where projects like these actually show an alternative that could be easily used and implemented. Yep.
We're going to go over this side, and then we'll come back to you. Yeah. We're going to just take a few more, and so just belt your questions out, and then we'll respond. Yeah.
So I would like to know what all of us think about the reduction of libraries in the city. The New York Public Library's own survey showed that library use, including books, is up 40%. But libraries like mine in Brooklyn Heights and my GED students throughout the cities have disappeared or been shrunken and stuffed in basements because the city, the last in this administration, has given our land to high-end real estate builders who build 60-story luxury towers and either erase libraries for 10 years like Donnell or stuff them in the basement at 1/3 the size. And I'm really concerned about this
Okay,
as a citizen.
Okay, a question about libraries. Just hang on to it. I'm going to take a few. Yeah, question about libraries. Yeah. Go.
I'd like to say something in defense of Dan Doctoroff and
Defense of libraries,
censors.
yeah.
Okay, so if you want less traffic in areas which are choking with cars, you need sensors to basically tell the cars that they can't come in the city anymore, just like they do in Copenhagen and Stockholm and London and other civilized cities on the planet. So what he was talking about in terms of using sensors is giving information basically to keep a lot of traffic out of New York, a lot of cars
Peter,
out of
got a
areas that are
question?
choking.
Question?
So I think she would like that.
Okay, so you're talking, there's a dark side, which is Scott's dark side, and Peter's saying there's an upside. So we'll let them control cars, but not people on sidewalks, I guess.
Right.
Okay, a couple of other questions. I'm just going to do questions, and then the panelists will respond to all of them at the same time. Yep, just give us a question, so we've got one.
If you had no budgetary or regulatory restriction, what one thing would you want to have happen in New York City tomorrow?
Okay. Some other general questions. So we've got a question about libraries. We've got a yes for regulating cars. We've got a question about if you had no limits, and then we've got some waving hands here. Yep, just give it to us quickly.
But kind of the role of tourism and changing neighborhoods, what would Jane Jacobs say about what's happened to Soho?
Okay, so libraries, unlimited dough, and tourism. Yes.
What would Jane say about, we have accessibility in terms of the streets now, wheelchairs supposedly can cross, you know, they're made now, we designed the sidewalks where it's accessible, and yet, and yet the sidewalks are not maintained. A place as central as
Got it.
6th Avenue. Okay.
So maintenance of sidewalks, yep. Other things, yes, quick. Back there.
When is the MoFad app coming to Android?
Want that MoFab app. Other general questions? Yeah, we'll take one more or two more, yep.
How would your work influence the design of cities of the future?
Okay, design of cities of the future. One more, over here, just yell it out.
Given the fact that it's going on in every city that I know of, that everything, all the old places are being torn down, and all the homeless people are being displaced, where are they going to go?
Apparently not to the libraries. That's I'm teasing these people because they're sitting right next to each other and they've both got the same kind of concern. So I hear you. No, I hear you. Okay, so here, one thing I really want to banish if we can. Let's just stop asking what would Jane say or what would Jane think. I can tell you, having met her, she'd turn right back and say, what do you think?
Yeah.
Right? So she was not a gospeler, you know. She was challenging all of us to pay attention and figure it out. So that's my little personal rant about us not ever trying to shorten these things. The truth of it is you just never really knew what she'd say or think because she was so smart and so well-read. She had a whole bunch. Anybody here that's met her will vouch for this. So let's hear what we all think, okay? So you've got a bunch there. You've got a question about libraries. You've got a question about if you had unlimited money, what would you do? You want to take the libraries? Take the libraries. Go.
I think it's a
Throw
crime.
in the homeless if you can at the same time. Because it's the same issue. It's about
Well, yeah,
people
it
being
is
displaced.
actually kind of the same issue. I think it's a crime what's happening to the libraries because although people say that people don't read books anymore, libraries are more essential now than they have ever been. By the way, I have a master's in library science, so this is near and dear to my heart. They've become the place outside of home and work for people to go, not only to socialize and attend events, but it's the place where there's an equal playing field for technology. A lot of people can't afford expensive computers and have, high-speed internet access. And this is where they go to get connected the way everybody else does. And the hours are getting shorter and shorter. Libraries are closed sometimes 2 or 3 days a week, and it's really unfair to the citizens of New York City, and it's really it's really creating more of an imbalance in our society.
Well, the other thing is that libraries are not just about books anymore. They're not just about reading. They're about a whole lot of things, about the function in a neighborhood that you need a place to go to get resources and meet one another and learn something new and ask new questions in the same way.
It's kind of like the Starbucks without the,
Yeah. Starbucks without the latte, I know.
And you don't have to pay.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And so what I'm going to do is put a
coffee.
plug in for tomorrow. MAS has a whole vein of work on the civic commons and how we define the civic commons differently and how that's changing in our cities. It's changing, and all different aspects of the civic commons are changing, and we need to figure out how we're going to resource this because it continues to be extremely important to neighborhoods to have places to go that level the playing field, give us access. So come back tomorrow. We're talking
But it also gives people who are homeless who really don't have access to the internet or to newspapers or to really any kind of information.
Right.
And it is access to information that gives everybody power, a place to go to have that.
Right.
Have access.
We have a session tomorrow on the, planning for people. Cities are about people, and how do you create those places for all people, homeless, not home, homed, everybody. And so I think just come back tomorrow and we'll talk about it. Let's deal with this question here. What would you do if you had unlimited resources and you could do it tomorrow? What would you do?
I would definitely create a system of protected, not like we have here, protected bicycle lanes, more along the lines of the sort of Scandinavian model, their own streets essentially for bicycles. I know this has nothing to do with food, but I'm also an avid cyclist, and so
You're allowed.
I think that's
bike lanes for all. What else? What would other folks say?
I would change the experience of the subway ride.
What would you do?
What would I do? Like, bring more air.
You'd which?
Bring more air as a start.
Yeah, ventilate it better.
And change the light.
Yeah.
Those two things, I would start with that, air and
easy.
light.
And use the space better.
More and use the space better,
Yeah.
design the space differently.
Yeah.
And use the light better and use the air better. Okay. What else? Daniel, what would you do?
I would build preschools to support every single one of New York City's languages.
Aha. Fantastic.
Thank you.
A tapestry of language schools. What else? Anybody else?
I would make the city car free.
Wow.
Because that would give us one third of the space back, right?
All right, so-
Minus bicycle space.
Right.
maybe,
All right, so
right?
let's do one, we'll do one more together, and then we're going to break because they're really flashing lights at us telling us that we're keeping you away from your beds and your home. And that subway conversation you're going to have in a different language. This notion of, change and tourism. New York is going to continue to attract people from all over the world. They're going to come, they're going to try to find their fortune here, they're going to resettle with their family here, or they're just going to come for a weekend. I just can't imagine we're going to not be that we're not going to be a place where people pop in, pop out. And so how do you think we can manage that? How can we be a place that works for those of us that are here day in and day out, and also be a place that the world will come to spend a particular amount of time in? Talk to me about how that's going to work.
So maybe part of it is educating people, right? I think tourists are only annoying if they're...
You only want educated ones.
No.
So you mean this test?
No, a little different. The tourists that are annoying are the ones that are, don't know where to go, what to do, or that have no sense of the space, right?
Right.
And I think if people are more familiar about where they're going and what they're looking at and why they're looking at it, and I think that they don't feel like tourists anymore, right?
Right.
They might become citizens.
That's interesting. You want to convert, you want to create a new kind of tourism here, that you come and somehow become an urbanist.
Well, I think that movement kind of exists, right? It's like travel like the local,
Ecotourism,
people, Airbnb, I think, changed a lot about that, where people also want to go somewhere and not stay in the generic hotel. They want to live with somebody and experience what it is to be like, taste the tap water in New York City, be like, oh, it's very chlorinated or something like that, and get that's part of the local experience.
Do you want to say something, Dennis?
Well, at the same time, people travel and want to feel like they're visiting somewhere else. So how do you keep that fine balance between, being away from home and yet feeling comfortable? And I think that, that as long as the city doesn't become an empty vessel for tourists, and is able to keep its identity as such and taking care of itself and investing in itself and its own neighborhoods, businesses, culture, that's one way where the city will evolve as a unit that invites tourists to experience and share those developments.
Yeah, I mean, you said you were wanting to have a new definition of authenticity. I think that's part of what we're talking about. This city runs the risk, perhaps always, of being a victim, as in any way you want to define that, a victim of its success, in whatever way you want to define that. And I think that's the razor's edge that we're walking in terms of how do we maintain all the various multiplicities of authenticity so we can experience it in a certain kind of way and our visitors will experience it in the real way as well. We're a great experiment. Isn't New York the great experiment? No wonder Jane set her books here, right? There's a reason their books were set in New York. It's a great experiment. Would you join me in thanking these fabulous folks? You're really great. Really, really great. Best of luck in all your projects. All right, folks, tomorrow morning, come on back. We'll be here. The doors open at 8:30. We'll see you sharp for MAS Summit 2015 Day 2.